So, talking about mastering for various streaming platforms, that involves two different, very related concepts. One is going to be just this concept of mastering in general. I'm not going to go too deep into that. There's plenty of tutorials online that talk to you about how to master. Eventually, I will probably do a more in-depth tutorial on mastering just as a general concept. But this is not going to go too in-depth on how you're supposed to master your songs. At the very core of it, mastering is essentially just applying a limiter to the master mixer fader for the master processing chain for your track, and then just increasing the pre-gain volume into a clipper, a compressor, or a limiter, which are all essentially the same sort of things. They are dynamics control to increase the average loudness of your song in order to make it compete with other songs on the platform. And a lot of people try to look for some sort of a rigid, specific answer. What should I master to? How should I master? And stuff like that. But as people are already saying in chat, like they have their own preferences for it, and different styles will actually have different results. So when it comes to different platforms, for example, why would we need to focus on something for this versus YouTube, this versus, say, Beatport, this versus, say, SoundCloud, right? And what that requires is for us to go down here into my user settings. Now, this third category right here called music quality. Maybe you've gone in, I don't know many people who have gone in and messed with their music preferences or their settings within Spotify. But my preference is to have the best quality streaming audio available without this second option set. Now, this second option is defaulted to on. And you noticed once I turn this switch on, this little drop-down box below lights up. When it's off, it's a bit grayed out. When it's on, it gets much brighter. And as you can see, when I click this, we have three different settings: loud, normal, and quiet. So normal is the default. I would say this is obviously the default setup because these are both listed as normal. And I believe it might also be automatic for streaming quality, but you can set it to a specific thing. I don't quite remember. It's been a long time since I've looked at my Spotify settings and kind of where they default to. But this green button right here and this normal setting right here is exactly why you need to care about what happens. So, I have not I tried to update Spectre, and unfortunately Spectre is not working right now. I have to wait for them to let me buy a license. So I'm gonna have to do some things before we get back the official Spectre. But in the meanwhile, we're just going to be recording the audio and looking at the waveform in order to determine this. If I had Spectre open, there would be a bit of an easier way to do it, but don't worry. So let's look at two cases of the same song. I'm going to choose one of my songs just to make sure I don't get in trouble. We're going to choose Planned Obsolescence, which I really need to put out more songs on Spotify. So what we're going to do is we're going to just play the build into the drop, and then we're going to record it twice. The first time we're going to record it is going to have the Spotify volume normalization on. The second time is going to have the volume normalization off. Let's make sure this is all set up. I just want to make sure nothing is risky. All right, now let's go. Recording. starting point. Give it about like another bar or two, probably the end of this phrase. All right, so there is the Spotify normalized audio. I'm going to pull this back in time a little bit, just to get it to about the same spot. Now we're going to go back into my settings and turn off the normalization. And let's see what that does to this exact audio file, or to this same audio file on their server. So rather than showing you everything, let's just move these two things together. Let's start looking at what's different. I don't even know if anything is necessarily different here, which might be an interesting thing that might upset me about Spotify, which, do they not normalize? Something, hold on. So I'm already finding out something that I am surprised to see, which is once this turns off, this is supposed to stop compressing the output of the song, but it looks like we have the same file. It looks like there is no difference, which means in some respects either I have the wrong audio file, but yeah, it looks like there's still master compression going on, which makes sense, but I was expecting a little bit of a different thing. This helps quite a bit in, again, explaining why this matters. I learned something, we all learned something. No matter what the normalization is at, it will compress the output. Now, if I look for planned obsolescence, I have the original audio file. Let's look at the original audio file and go back to that point in the song where that drop happens. That drop happens right here. We can see it. So let's compare. See what has changed, right? It looks like it's essentially the same audio file. I'm not seeing much of an intrinsic difference between these, but do you notice something about the waveforms? There's some weird things with these waveforms that I'm noticing. One, my track actually has way more dynamics in the original file than the Spotify version. The distance between this peak and this trough, this lower volume, and this peak and this trough are much, much more reduced. In addition, if we look at the absolute values of the songs, on the left, this is Spotify. This is original. The Spotify file, at its max volume, hits at about -6. My song hits just under 0. That is very true, Elskiss. My master file is normalized. Yes, that is true. I also have Spotify at its max volume, right? I have Spotify at its max volume. I have my speaker on my computer at its max volume. So, the way to think about it, or the way that I think about it, is that in order to get my song to work like their song, I have to actually apply limiting, not in terms of increasing the pre-gain, but in terms of turning down the ceiling. I'll put this limiter here. I'll set this ceiling to -7. Now these are at about the same level. I'll set it to -6 because it looked like they were at about there. And then let's go ahead and just freeze and flatten this audio file. See what they look like. Oh, that looks much closer together, right? It looks almost like the same audio file now. It looks actually scarily accurate. Mine has definitely a bit more kind of energy in it. So there's more happening in the Spotify compression algorithm, but you can see kind of the beginnings of what's happening here. The limiting was not made to turn the song up, but to bring it down to a specific level. As you can see, when I do it, there's definitely more compression. You can see they preserve dynamics a little bit better, whereas mine, when I'm just turning down the ceiling, it gets way more flattened out. So Spotify does a good job of preserving that in some respects, but it's still going to compress your song. But what about YouTube? I hear the straw man in my head asking, the imaginary person who asked the question. Well, I don't have my song on YouTube, but let's look up another song. Let's look up Must Die. Let's just look up one of his newer songs. Let's try this one, 6 Days Ago. Probably gonna be a really cool song, but we don't really even care about what the song is. We don't really care about what the song contains. There's only one thing that I care about on this song, on this video, and that's what happens when I right-click on the actual video. You can see there's a couple of options here. Loop to let the video replay automatically. Copy the video at the current time. Really good if you're trying to share it. Copy the embedding code if you're trying to take the video and put it on like your website or something. Debug info if, let's say, you are a YouTube dev or you are someone who is working on, say, a YouTube API, something that's supposed to work with YouTube to create some sort of interaction on a separate thing. Troubleshooting, and then this is really the important thing for us. Yes, indeed, Candid Oak, this wonderful thing called Stats for Nerds. Because if you care about mastering for streaming platforms, you're a fucking nerd. And I'm okay with that. I hope you are too. So let's click on that. Now, this has information that might be useful, video ID information. I believe that's the same up here. Yes, so the video ID is the same exact thing as here. This is, I actually found out from a Tom Scott video that I was watching yesterday that this is actually just a randomly generated series of numbers and letters based on a specific counting system that allows for literally billions and billions and quadrillions and quintillions and just huge amounts of options just from adding on individual versions of that same counting system. But we don't care about that. Viewport, cool information, talks about kind of how this is shaped. You can see it grows as I change this. The current or optimal resolution for the video, important if you're trying to figure out like, oh, how is my video going to look? This will help you. Codecs, not really important. Color, not really important. All this stuff is useful if you are a programmer. But if you notice, there's something on that list I ignored. There's one thing on that list I ignored, which if you are a musician, if you are an audio engineer, if you are a sound designer, if you care about what you're hearing on the internet or from the internet, this is your best friend. Volume/normalized. Now, this one right here, this 100, this is just a display, a numerical display of this fader right here. As I move the volume fader down, you see the two numbers by percent signs decrease until we get to 0. But notice, as I bring this back up to the top, the left one says 100%, The right one says 42%. And then we have this number in parentheses next to the words content loudness. And this says 7.6 decibels. So what happened is precisely the same thing that happened to my song when we put on that limiter and turned down the ceiling. Does anyone remember how much I turned this down by to get it to match this? By about 6 decibels, about 7 decibels. My song was probably close in loudness to the output loudness, the final master loudness of this song from Must Die. They turned down the song by 7.6 decibels in order to bring it within the constraints of YouTube's loudness standards. That's what's going on here. There are specific loudness levels that different stream platforms will have. Now, each company has a slightly different one, but they tend to gravitate around a certain range, which we'll look up in just a second. So what this second number right here, what this 42 is referring to, it's not how much the song was turned down. This is the remaining percentage of loudness. So you can look at this and say the song is now 42% as loud as it was when it was uploaded to the platform. The inverse of that is it was turned down by 58%. Over half of its loudness, in terms of how we perceive it, has been removed. Now, that might matter to you. It might not. But now that we are armed with this information, we can start to make decisions during the mastering phase of our songwriting process. Now, I'm just going to look up mastering for Spotify. I'm just going to look that up on Google. Now, you have Spotify's official thing here, and then you have this one right here from Mastering the Mix, which I'm going to show you both because obviously YouTube and Spotify have different values here. But this one should hopefully show you that there are different standards, unless this is the one that I'm not thinking of. Nope, here we go. Okay, cool. So here is Spotify's official FAQ in terms of how you are supposed to do this process. This will have some information that's useful, but these two are the important ones for us. How's it going, Flauschy? Will Spotify play my track at the level it's mastered? Not always. This is because Spotify applies loudness normalization, this third one, which is what we just talked about. It's essentially a limiter that scans your track and does some math on it. If your song is louder than the reference point, if your song, in terms of its average loudness, which is for Spotify targeted at minus 14 decibels, integrated loudness units full scale. We will talk a little bit about LUFS or LUFS or loudness units in a second, but minus 14 integrated loudness units is where Spotify sets your track. So if yours is at, say, minus 7 loudness units, your song will get pulled down by 7 decibels in relationship to their metering. If your song is quieter than that, it will get pulled up until it hits just at about minus 14. I've noticed it doesn't turn things up as aggressively as it turns them down. So if your song is incredibly quiet, it will still sound fairly quiet on Spotify or YouTube. But I have seen videos on YouTube where this content loudness becomes a negative number, which is to say it goes up in volume. They add volume to it to bring it up in their system. And you can see Spotify uses a specific service in order to calculate the loudness of your track. This is sort of how they are processing it. Let's switch over to the second chart, which is going to show us the loudness ranges for different streaming platforms. But as you can see, each platform has a different one. Minus 13 to minus 15, minus 16, minus 16, minus 9 to minus 13, minus 11, minus 13 to 15, minus 14 to 16, minus greater than minus 9, minus 6 to minus 9, minus 8 to minus 13. For Spotify, various Apple services, Spotify's Loud algorithm, YouTube, Deezer, CD printings, Club Play, SoundCloud. Now, if you notice, for all of these down here, they generally exist close to that range of minus 14. That's why people suggest minus 14 loudness units as a reference point, because minus 13 to minus 15 is basically minus 14. Minus 9 to minus 13, it's a little bit louder. Minus 16, it's a little bit quieter. 13 to 15, 14 to 16. Minus 14 is fairly close to all of these examples. But notice how that changes when we go to CD, Club Play, and SoundCloud. Now, SoundCloud has, over time, begun to introduce a minimal level of loudness standards. It used to be that there was no volume normalization, no loudness normalization for SoundCloud. They still are pretty lenient in comparison, minus 8 to minus 13, but at this point, every streaming platform that is out there will in some way limit your song if it goes over a certain loudness. Now, we can talk at the end about how important it is to care, and that's something we're going to talk about. But I just want to point out, when it comes to Club Play, you're essentially not dealing with anything at all. Most songs do not get to minus 6 loudness units. It's very hard. I would not say you need a master. We'll get to that. I don't believe you need to, but if you really, really care about preserving the total integrity of every single song on every single platform, then it might be a good idea. But for most artists, that's not feasible, plausible, or necessary. So for clubs, since even the loudest dubstep song is generally about minus 6 to minus 4, you're usually fine. And that's why I say, if you're mixing or mastering for the club, if you're going to try and get it played out on large speaker systems, fuck it. Go as loud as you want. It really doesn't matter, because the tangible limit is almost non-existent. We haven't talked about this one, which is true peak loudness. That's supposed to be the objective level of the very loudest point of the very loudest sound at the very loudest moment in your song. If that does not go over this, you're safe. Anything above that's going to get kind of chopped off in a way that won't add necessarily distortion to your track, but it won't sound that good either. But as you can see, for Club Play, it has the least amount of kind of true peak weighting, so to speak. Everything else is minus 1 to minus 2, except for CDs. Both CDs and clubs only have 0.1. It's just under 0 digital clipping. So now let's talk a little bit about what loudness units are, what decibels true peak are, and different ways that you can look at them. So to talk about loudness units, I think it could help to discuss different types of decibels. Now, you're probably all used to thinking about decibels, dB. It's this number right here. Minus 7.7 dB. Minus 6 dB. It's volume. It's decibels. But what are decibels? And are there more than one? I'm going to show you just two. First, there's dBFS, which stands for decibels full scale. This is a digital measurement of the amplitude of waveforms based on their digital signal, which is to say, we count these points, even if the waveform goes above. See how this waveform is getting kind of squashed right here? You see there's this little divot right there. And if you look very closely, there's like a dashed line. This is what we're referring to. The dB full scale cannot go over the digital limit of the audio. But there's other types of indications. This shows you another one, which is dBVU. This is decibels in voltage units. That refers to how the electrical currents are passing. And that has a much different rating scale compared with dB full scale. I believe these use dB full scale, not dBVU or the other one that we're going to talk about, which is dBTP, which is what we are talking about for mastering. That's decibels true peak. Decibels true peak, if we go back to this first diagram right here, in decibels full scale, we have a signal that gets kind of chopped off right about 0. There's these things called intersample peaks, where each of these dots represents a point of analysis for the computer to say at this point in time, the signal is at this value. At this point in time, it's at this value, this point's at this value, etc., etc. But it's still calculating the stuff. So to get from this point to this point, there's usually going to be a little bit of a kind of bump. So sometimes the dB full scale will go slightly over 0, but in general, dB full scale cuts off. dB true peak calculates those intersample peaks and says, okay, so technically our total volume is actually all the way up here. That's what we care about. That's what we're going to be using for our calculation, not what's hitting the digital 0. That gives you more control over the perceived loudness of the signal as contrasted with the decibel loudness or the physical volume of the signal. This is why I try to say, even though volume and loudness are closely connected, they are two separate concepts that exist in kind of separate scales of kind of magnitude. And there is one other form of dB that can be important, just to introduce you to these concepts, is this thing called dBSPL, which brings up this wonderful chart that I'm sure a bunch of you have seen before, the Fletcher-Munson curve. dBSPL is something that is directly related to the actual intensity of pressure in the air. Like the actual sound waves that move are measured in decibels sound pressure level. The issue with decibels is, first off, there's no standard for what it is. Second, it's generally a relative level. If I turn up the amplifier, I change the decibel relativity, so to speak. And over time, people were like, we want something that is a little bit closer to what loudness is generally working with. Now, we came up with this idea of RMS, loudness, which is a way of determining volume over time, where we have the dB full scale measurement in either peak, which is just where it is at that moment, whatever the highest point was. That is going to be the peak value. And then you're going to calculate each one of those peak values over a set period of time, and then you average that out to get a new running tally of the average amount of volume. And that was not totally objective, but it was much closer to the ways that our ears respond to loudness and frequencies. We don't really care about an immediate peak. We care about a continuous, sustained amplitude. True peak, RMS, peak versus RMS, dBFS, dBVU, dBSPL, all of these things are relative. So we decided to try and come up with a new way of measuring loudness. And the way that we decided to do that is through something called loudness units full scale, which is just a way of measuring a conceptual maximum loudness for any system. No matter what speaker setup, no matter what amplitude you are setting it to, no matter where you're listening, whether you're talking about your iPhone or whether you're talking about a giant 20 speaker stack of monitors or PAs for like a festival. Loudness units is just whatever that absolute maximum would hypothetically be. So in a sense, it's much more objective than all of these other relative volume balances. So it's very similar in calculation to RMS, but it gives us slightly better answers. That's why we use it. Now, there's a few different options in terms of checking your loudness units. Depending upon your limiter, the limiter might come with a loudness unit scale. Typically, I have this set to integrated as the main one. Sometimes I have it set to short term, which is usually like if I'm checking the loudness of a drop. Integrated is the way that I check the loudness of the whole song. And that is the thing that's much closer to RMS. So if you don't have this, if something shows you RMS, there is approximately, I'd say, a 1-to-1 comparison. -3 RMS is probably closer to like -5 or -6 loudest units, but I'd say maybe it's like 1.5 to 1. Let's call it that. Not objective, of course, but being able to look at that is obviously very helpful while you're mastering, but FabFilter Pro L costs a lot of money. If you don't have Pro L, that's okay. People have recommended a few free ones. I think they said tone boosters, loudness meter. I'm assuming this does not cost money because it's just a loudness meter, right? Where is it? I'm assuming it's a free one, right? Whoever was saying, someone mentioned this. I don't see any sort of loudness control on here, so I'm going to assume actually that there's not. So I would say don't use this, but there is the Julian loudness meter, which I do know is free. There is a professional version, but the free version is totally fine. Anyways, it's okay. It's okay. Because this will give you all of the information you need. Integrated, short-term, as well as true peak. That will tell you everything you need. It's really, really helpful. I would recommend this if you don't have something like Pro L. I believe Melda has a loudness analyzer as well that I believe is free. Yes. So Melda also has a free loudness analyzer. Exactly. Yeah. I just saw your comment in chat. Sorry. So these are two free options. You do not need to pay money to look at your loudness, okay? Don't let anyone tell you you need to buy, our magic cool product that lets you look deep into your music and see all the defects. No, just get a free one. Get a free analyzer. Here's two great ones. They tell you everything you need. You just need integrated loudness and true peak dB. That's all you need. And then if you want to, Pro L's pretty good and it comes with it. Now, let's get to how this actually affects what you should be doing for your music, how you should be mastering. Everything up to this point is what we would call descriptive analysis. We are not making qualitative judgments on whether something is good or bad. We are just describing the way it is. Now we're getting into something that would be a bit more of my opinion on the subject, obviously informed by my experience, by my education, by what I've looked into. But this is, to some extent, my opinion on it, okay? Now, I suggest that you maintain an awareness about this, but do not live your life by this. I don't pay attention to what my loudness is when I upload my music to Spotify or YouTube or wherever. And if we look at my music before all of the limiting and everything, let's just take a guess as to why I don't really care. Because I like loud music. I expect my music to be played at a high volume, to have a lot of energy. As you can see, personally, I just say fuck it. But that's because of the context of my music. All of the other songs that I expect my music to be played with are also going to be equally limited. If I play my song, for example, on Spotify, and then I go play a Must Die song on Spotify, they're going to be limited to equivalent levels. So the people who like our songs are probably going to already have their volume levels set, so it doesn't really matter that our songs are limited. The relative balance will be compensated for by the consumer, by the viewer, by the listener of my music. Now, let's take a separate case. Let's take Porter Robinson. Now let's look up two different uploads of Sad Machine. First, we'll go to the original one, then we'll go to the one that Porter Robinson uploaded on his own. Stats for nerds on this one. Whoo, look at that. 100% volume, 54% normalization. Content loudness, 5.4 decibels. So for proximity, they have what I would call the album version of the song. The version they have is the version you get when you download the album on iTunes, when you download the album on Amazon, when you buy the CD. This stuff is the same. Let's go over to this one. Right click, stats for nerds. Oh, interesting. It's the same song, but look at the loudness normalization. 92%. For his version of the song that is specifically made for this streaming platform. It's an official lyric video. So Porter Robinson knew the song would have a visual medium to it and will go on to YouTube, a platform that he knows is going to be limited. He released two versions of the song. He has the version that is probably, if theirs is at minus 14 and his was turned down 5 dB, it's probably the case that his song was at about minus 10, minus 9 loudness units integrated on the way that we would measure it. And then this one is like minus 13. So probably a pretty drastic, not an intense, not an insane dip, but enough so that YouTube's loudness algorithm did not squash it. Now, I don't know if the same is true for Spotify. There is a chance that there are two masters of Worlds by Porter Robinson. There are the masters that he plays out live. There's the masters that are on the CD, and the masters that are on certain streaming platforms or that are given to blogs like this. And then there are the masters designed for streaming platforms where there is a compromise being made. When your song is louder than someone else's song, your song is going to sound better under no compression, under no normalization of volume, of loudness, I should say. Your track will objectively sound better because of something that humans have called excitement bias, which is the new thing changes the way that we perceive the old thing. The brighter thing changes the way that we perceive the darker thing. The louder thing changes the way we perceive the quieter thing. So if you have a song that is louder than someone else's song, our ears are kind of stupid. And because we can hear more of the signal, we believe it sounds better. It's one of the reasons why I say if you are processing your sounds, make sure to gain stage, because if you're just adding loudness and not adding character, you might as well do the same thing by turning the sound up with a volume control. No reason to use something more CPU intensive than that. And conversely, you will find yourself with situations that you might actually want your song to actively ignore these things and in fact exploit them. You could have a song that feels like it's supposed to be much louder than it is just by pushing the compression and then knowing it will be pulled into this compression algorithm. Now, I don't do that. I think that's kind of weird, but it's a possibility. Can compression cause distortion without makeup gain? Yes, because distortion is just compression at a faster time scale. We've talked about this on stream before, but compression, limiting, and distortion are all the same exact process, but at different time scales. Compressors are on typically a much different time scale than a limiter. And a distortion unit is just a limiter that operates at the waveform level per cycle rather than the waveform level for a broader period of time. A compressor usually acts anywhere from 10 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds, all the way up to 5 to 10 seconds. And the limiting will be usually 1 to 100 milliseconds, and then the distortion's like immediate. The higher the sample rate is, the less distortion will be. No, I think you are misinterpreting things. Try not to make everything too correlated. There might be some connections there, but I think you are now getting into, oh, well, there's this thing, and this thing, and I think that's not important. I think what's more important is the song. It's really easy to dive into these topics and focus on all of these little technical details, but remember, I don't limit my songs for streaming platforms. I do not do that. Other people I know, other people I've shown you, do not do that. Other people do. The important thing is the song itself. If we compare Sad Machine to, say, that Must Die song, for example, right here, if we compare the loudness of these songs, this song's pretty loud, but it's not meant to be like balls to the wall, headbanging bass music. This is meant to be more emotive. It's meant to be more emotional. It's meant to be more dynamic, where you have these big, loud, epic moments, and it all comes down. Like, I'm sure everyone remembers the first time they heard, like, this moment. Where is it? Like, where emotionally this is not huge. This isn't big and powerful, but it has a lot of energy. And then as soon as that energy goes away, what happens? The energy immediately vanishes. And we have this very close, this very dynamic, personal, intimate, vulnerable moment. That is what is important. I know what you meant, Kajtora. I'm saying it's not important. Yeah, these things are going to influence the way that we perceive the song. So this is the type of song that you wouldn't want to squash the dynamics of. I have a feeling if you compared this version with this version, that transition from bwam, 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 ba-da, big, heavy chorus, who survived? Like, that moment will probably feel less impactful on this version that has more volume normalization applied, more compression, in essence, applied to the sound. The changes in volume throughout this song are probably pretty few and far between. That's what I meant. That's what I mean by context, Kajtora. That's what I mean. That's what I'm literally saying. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's literally the words that are coming out of my mouth right now are literally that thing. So the context of the song is what's important here. This song even this more dynamic part of the song is still pretty high energy. There's still a lot of stuff going on. So it's not as important that the changes between these big, energy intensive, powerful moments and these quieter moments, they don't need to be so far apart. So when you're writing your music, ask yourself, where is this going to be played? Is this going to be played in a club? Is it going to be played really loud in someone's headphones? Is it going to be played at a huge festival? Or is it going to be played in the car with the speaker cranked and the subwoofer rocking? Like, what is the world that this song is going to live in? Or is this the sort of thing that you listen to on a hi-fi speaker setup with a glass of wine? Is this the kind of thing you put on when you're trying to study, when you're trying to relax? Is this the kind of song that you want to put on when you're cruising down the highway rather than racing down the highway? Those questions will influence the way artistically you apply things like compression, distortion, and EQ, not just on the mix, but also on the master to get to these different loudness levels. And there is definitely, there isn't going to be a definitive answer. What I would say is, like, you have a spectrum here, like most things in life. There isn't just a black or white answer. There isn't just a binary yes or no, 1 or 0. There's a gradient. There's some sort of spread. And over that spread is where we find the thing. And it's essentially a question of not what is best for my song, but in a sense, it's what is least worst for my song. What is the compromise that I need to make in order to serve these multiple masters. In some cases, like with me, like with Must Die, the compromise is not to compromise. You listen to our music the way we intended it to be heard. I'm maybe not as precious with how people interpret the context of my music. I am very much about the death of the artist, where once my music goes out into the world, it is not just my song, it is your song to take with and do with it what you like in terms of how it affects your existence. I don't want you to see the song only in the way that I interpreted the song as I was writing it. But if you're not listening to my song loud, what the fuck are you doing? My music is angry, aggressive bass music. Who listens to angry, aggressive bass music really, really quietly? I certainly fucking don't. So that is one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people who make sure that every single song, no matter what song they write, every single song is exactly at -14, -15, -16. Just to make sure that no matter what, their song works perfectly on every platform. I don't know many people who do that. I'm sure someone out there does that. I'm sure there's someone who has gotten so paranoid about loudness or algorithms that they just go, oh no, I have to make sure that this one's -14, this one's -15, this one's -12, this one's -6. I need to make sure every single one is within these ranges. And their lives are probably kind of shitty. But clearly, that's not the only options. As Porter Robinson showed us, you can have the same track exist with multiple degrees of loudness. You don't have to change it too much, but you can. You can adjust these things, and you can use them to inform the way you go. But ultimately, it's you that has to make the decision. I can only show you, I say this all the time, I am only showing you the door. You have to walk through it. You have to decide the path that you want to go down. Do you care about all this? Or do you just want to make club bangers? Do you just want to make things that just slap? You just want to make fucking heavy, aggressive, just knockers and make the audience move their feet, shake their titties, shake their ass, shake their packages, whatever they want to shake, you know? Or it's like, am I making lo-fi hip-hop beats for people to study to? Maybe I don't need to make my song -6 because it's basically a septuplet swing hip-hop loop and a chord sample.